Okay, we've been doing two lessons, lesson 102 and 105. A week ago today, we started 102, and we got through most of that. On Sunday, we finished 102, and then we started it on 105. However, of course, there were some things going on between that time. It was Wednesday. We know that not much happened on Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday was kind of busy, though, for Jesus, who was preparing for the Passover. And we talked about how that preparation was to be very precise, the way the meal was eaten and what took place. It would have been eaten on Thursday evening after sundown, which would have been Friday for the Jews. We talked about how the lamb had to be prepared a certain way. Unleavened bread was used. Other things that went with that. It's interesting that Jesus sent Peter and John to make preparations. And you remember we talked about what Jesus' response was when they asked, "Where do we go?" And you find the guy that's got a pitcher of water. It's kind of unusual, but that was what was discussed in Mark 14:12 through 16. And we made a note that it was interesting that it was Thursday morning now, and Jesus woke up that morning, as we talked about for the last time. And Jeanette and I was talking about, when you think about it, it's really kind of a sad statement for the last time. And we wondered about after he was risen, if he slept. And I truly don't know. I have researched, I have dug through different articles and things, and I cannot find anything, maybe somebody else did, that might indicate that after he arose from the dead, that he slept. Something that came to mind just today after I was reading an article is that we're going to have new bodies. And those new bodies may not require us to sleep.
I don't think he slept.
I don't read it, I don't see it, and I kind of think maybe not. I mean, nothing confirms either way, but yeah. And we may not ever have the need to sleep again. Constant 24 hours. Eternity. So I don't know, that was something I wanted to bring up. We know that Jesus had a strong desire to observe the meal with the apostles. We read about that in Luke 22:15 and 16. We know that several events took place during the Passover supper. We're not certain exactly of the order or sequence of events, but we are we do know that it was of importance. That familiar argument rose its ugly head again about who was the greatest. And I'm sure that troubled Jesus when they asked that same question that had been already answered 2 other times. Jesus patiently reminds them that greatness is not based upon position, as we said, but that greatness is based upon service. Service, yeah. And then, of course, came the ultimate example of service and of humility when Jesus washes the apostles' feet. And it said in John 13:15 that as Jesus always does, he leads by example. We talked about the custom of washing feet, why it was necessary. We talked about that we don't do that today. We don't observe that. Jesus was not instituting the washing of feet. The only written information we have was a decree made in AD 306 from the Council of Bishops in Elvira, Spain, and it was condemned in this degree. So that is not an issue. And that kind of bridged the gap between lesson 102 and 105. Any questions on that part of the review? Okay, we went on then to discuss in 105, we were in Thursday, and this is when the betrayal and Peter's denial was foretold. and mainly working out of the book of John, chapter 13, verses 21 through 38 is where we'll be. We noted that all four gospel accounts have Judas's betrayal and the prediction of Peter's denial. As Christ was washing the apostles' feet, he made the claim that someone would betray him, someone close to him. And this was to fulfill prophecy of Psalm 41:9 we talked about. And this is interesting in, I guess, my thoughts. The fact that he told them in advance would reconfirm, one, that he was divine, and that the betrayal didn't catch him by surprise and or disrupt any of the plans that was put into place. He became troubled in spirit. We talked about the reason that. He knew his time was near. He knew what he was going to have to endure. One of the things that he always was worried about was the apostles' lack of maturity. You know, before, he was always there to protect them. And we'll see a little bit later on what he tells them to do in preparation for being on their own. We'll discuss that. He flat out said in verse 21, one of you will betray me. And of course, the apostles were bewildered. In verse 22, they began to discuss among themselves. This is of Luke 22:23. Which one of them it might be. Even in John, verse 22, it says, then the disciples looked at one another perplexed about whom he spoke. Picture for the moment, as we talked about, the apostles were looking around confused. John was sitting and reclining next to Jesus. Peter had motioned over to John to ask Jesus who it was. And that's what he did. He just asked, Lord, who is it? And of course, Jesus' response in verses 26 and 27, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. Having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Now, after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Some of the translations say again. Then Jesus said to him, what you do quickly. And we discussed what that meant. What you do quickly, meaning just get on. Just get on. Any thoughts, questions so far from the... One of the reasons we talked about, or several reasons that it was confusing to the apostles, is because of who Judas was. Judas was probably held in high respect, being the only apostle from Judea. Maybe he was perhaps better educated, as we talked about, than the rest. Of course, he had been put in a place of honor as a treasurer, handling all the money to give out, the alms to give out on behalf of the group. I'm sure that many of them thought that Judas would be the last person that would ever betray Christ. Dan Haley brought up really a good point when I asked the question of why would Judas do that? We've always been told it was greed, and that's part of it, I'm sure. But he brought up the point that maybe in Judas's mind, not trying to downplay it at all, but thought because of who Jesus was, he would never let that happen to him. And he saw an opportunity to make some money. So going back to the greed aspect. But we'll never know for sure. I think, oh, there we go. And that's about where we left off. So any comments before we move on to some new material? Okay, good. After Judas left, Jesus turned to the other apostles and said, look at verse 31 through 35 of John 13. Bible says, so when he had gone out, being Judas, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him immediately. Verse 33, little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. You will seek me. And as I said to the Jews, where I am going, you cannot come. So now I say to you, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. As already noted in our discussions earlier on, the public ministry of Jesus came to an end with chapter 12 of John. Chapters 13 through 17 make up a large section of material in which Jesus was no longer ministering to the multitudes. Instead, he was spending a few hours prior to his crucifixion the next day with his own, to give them some final instructions. You know, Christ said as Judas left to put the gears in motion of his arrest and the trial and the execution, to get that in place and going, Jesus, the Son of Man, and the Father were going to be glorified. Verse 31 said, God is glorified in him. Verse 32, God will also glorify him in himself. And then the last part of 32 says, God would glorify him immediately. Comments or thoughts, questions? What does that mean exactly?
It's sort of like this further teaching in John 15 chapter, where it talks about he being in the Father and the Father in him, that they could also be in the Father if they were in him. So it's just indicating that he and the Father are one.
Are one, yeah.
The glory which God gets, he gets, vice versa.
Exactly. From thoughts of what his suffering and death meant for him, Jesus turned his attention to how his disciples would be affected when he was gone. Look at, again, in verse 33, 34, and 35. He addresses them as little children. I shall be with you a little while longer. Again, you will seek me, and as I have said to the Jews, where I am going, you cannot come. So now I say to you, a new commandment I give you, to that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Question: is this really a new commandment? Okay. Deuteronomy 6:5. Go ahead.
I think it's new in the sense that he is teaching them a new kind of love.
Yeah.
The love that he has for them, because he's going to give up his life for them.
Yeah.
That wasn't included in the old law.
Yeah. What you're talking about is also found in Leviticus 19 and 18. It's new not simply because it was a command to love others, because we've had that. But that idea obviously is century old. It was new because Jesus said to love as I have loved you. And then he added what was in verse 35. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Someone has said that, and Matt, I know, has even said this from the pulpit, people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's so true. Thoughts or questions or comments on that? Okay, moving on. Now we come to the final topic of this lesson. Christ foretells Peter's denial. Peter must have picked up on the words Jesus had said earlier when he said, I am with you a little while longer. And he asked then in verse 36, he said, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you shall follow me afterward. Peter said in verse 37 to him, Lord, why can't I not follow you now? He says, I will lay down my life for your sake. What did Peter not understand here? Jesus was going to die. Peter did not grasp that. He did not grasp it. Here for a moment, what I want to do is I want to switch over to Luke's account in Luke 22. I like some of the things that Luke writes about this. 22 and verse 31. 22 and verse 31. He says, and the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. What is he saying here? What is he indicating?
Give in.
What's that?
He's going to give in to Satan.
He's going to give in to Satan. See, after Peter proclaimed that he would lay down his life for Jesus, Jesus, with as much tenderness as possible, I'm sure, responded to him and said, that you will, Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. Remember that women sifted wheat to remove what? Impurities, yeah. And the not so good stuff. The devil here, figuratively speaking, was sifting the apostles to expose impurities and to exploit them. Yes, James. Yeah, I agree with you. Along those same lines. I mean, let's face it. Satan already had one defection, and he wanted more. And think about Peter's character. He was a little bit impulsive. A little bit. I mean, cut the ear off the guard there in the garden. We'll get to that in a little bit too. He was a little bit trigger happy, maybe, if that's the word I can use. I mean, he wanted to get into the mix-up. Impulsive. Yeah. And so Satan would have especially targeted Simon Peter because he was one of the leaders, the spokesman. Knowing that Jesus, knowing this, Jesus said to Peter, look at verse 32 of Luke 22. It says, but I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren, or your brothers, I think some of your translations say. When it says there that Jesus prayed for him that his faith should not fail, and when you have returned to me, what do you get out of that statement? Repent. Yeah, repent. And we're going to see, I mean, Peter, when he realized what happened, went out and bitterly wept. And we blamed him a lot, but as we were talking, Jeanette and I, after Sunday, all of the disciples scattered. You know? Yes, Jeanette.
You know, I think Peter really meant that. I am not going to deny. I know people in this room that would say the same thing. I am not going to deny you. I hope I would. And really mean it, but this is just this Roman government is just so oppressive. We think our government is oppressive, and some of them they are. Poor Peter, and the thought that Jesus prayed for him.
Yeah.
What a wonderful thought that is. And I hope he's praying for all of us still.
That shows the compassion and mercy and grace that Jesus had, knowing that Peter was going to do this. And I agree, I don't think Peter ever intended, not even the thought, but when the moment came, fear took over. He succumbed to that fear. Oh, yeah.
And that's the difference between him and Judas. Judas premeditated his betrayal.
That's right.
He planned it. Peter and the rest of them, they got scared at the last minute, and they did.
They did return. Yes.
Christ knows very much more. He knew that even though people was going to deny, he would return to him.
Yeah. He knew that. And remember how Peter died?
Upside down.
Yeah, he requested to be crucified upside down. He didn't feel it nearly worthy to be crucified like Christ. He truly was sorry. And Jesus knew that. He knew that. Yeah. Of course, Peter protested, Lord, with you I am ready to go both to prison and death. And again, Christ, I'm sure, shook his head and he asked, will you lay down your life for me? And of course, Peter said, absolutely. He said, I say to you, Peter, the rooster will not crow today until you have denied 3 times that you know me. Matthew, Luke, and John, in their accounts of this, mention only one crowing of the rooster. Mark mentions it 2 times, that the rooster will crow twice. Is that an issue? No. No, as it says in Roper's book here, as it has been the case in other passages where one writer mentioned 2 of something and the other mentioned only 1, this difference is unimportant. Okay? There is no contradiction because here's the reason. Where there are 2, there's certainly 1, right? And that makes sense. Mark just gave an added detail not reported by the other writers. So that's interesting. So don't make a big deal of it. And then, of course, he turned to the other 10, and this is where he said, and this is in Matthew the 26th chapter, verse 31. He says, you will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Also see that in Zechariah 13 and 7. But Jesus added something. You remember what he said? He said, but after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. And we need to keep that note in the back of that promise, in the back of our mind, because after his resurrection, he would gather his disciples in Galilee as a shepherd gathers his scattered flock. Pretty interesting. Thoughts, comments?
We think we'd be so strong. Peter and the rest of the apostles, it sure didn't affect us.
Yeah. I mean, we all would like to think that in the face of anything, we would never falter. But we're human. Peter was human. And God knew that. Jesus knew that. And they all scattered. They all got scared.
Times when we saw the miracle.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Different ways to deny Christ without saying a word.
Oh, absolutely. That actions speak louder than words is a concept. It's interesting that Peter was so sure of himself that he refused to accept Jesus' words. He declared, even though all may fall away because of you, I will never fall away. And again, the Lord told him, truly, I say to you that this very night, before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Of course, Peter kept insisting, no, even I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And I think from the bottom of his heart, that's how he felt. I really do. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and think about all the other apostles, they said the same thing. We'll never deny you. We'll die with you. And of course, they scattered. Any thoughts? Any more on that? Yeah. James, then, yeah.
Jesus, he always prayed to the Father.
Yeah.
With God's help, we can do anything. Rely on your own strength.
With God, all things are possible. Yeah.
Just when Jesus told Peter this, and then to know it, then still do it.
Yeah. Well, and that where it says he went out and he wept, and the key word for me is bitterly. When you think about that, that's deep down sadness, almost unbearable. Yeah. He did, and he made others around him stronger. And that's what Jesus was talking about when he says, strengthen your brothers. Other comments? All right. It was obvious that the apostles were not prepared for the hard times ahead, right? Jesus again affirmed that he would die, quoting from Isaiah 53 and 12. He warned his disciples that in the future, this is interesting, they could not expect the favorable reception that they had received when he had earlier sent them out. Remember, he said, don't take anything. Everything will be provided for you. But now, look what he tells them to do. He said, as he advised them to prepare for the future, he mentioned buying a sword. Luke 22 and 36. Roper says the disciples thought that he was referring to literal swords and said that they had two. Jesus said that would be enough in Luke 22 and 38. Since two swords would be insufficient to defend 12 men, that should have given them a clue that Christ was not speaking literally. However, they failed to understand his words, even as he failed to understand what he had said concerning his impending death. Now, I pulled up out of Burton Kaufman's commentary this particular verse, verse 36. And it's interesting. I just out of curiosity, does anybody, how many people in here think that he was talking literally about a sword? Okay, you're not alone. I'm kind of leaning that way in some degree because here's what is said by Kaufman. Excuse me. The absolute pacifist tradition among Christians of all ages and the acceptance of it by many commentators make this verse a real problem for many. Most commentators view the passive as figurative, as did Gelden Hayes, who said the Lord intended, in parentheses, these words in a figurative sense. But if the sword is figurative, okay, and here's the catch, what about the purse and the wallet and the cloak? Is that figurative? As Hobbes said, it's impossible to tone down this statement. Neither can we dismiss it as not being a genuine saying of Jesus. The clear meaning of the passage is that a sword is the one thing needful, even surpassing in priority such an important item as a cloak. Okay? Now, there's two errors that we need to avoid. So one is the supposition that the gospel should be spread by the sword. No. Okay? Two, that the notion that a sword should ever be employed against lawful authority, that's wrong. Before the evening was over, the Lord would have further occasion to demonstrate the proper and improper uses of a sword. That's when we get to Peter cutting off the guard's ear. The directions concerning the sword were not made with reference to his being taken in the garden, but to their future lives. Okay? And here's where it kind of sits with me. Individual by the name of J.S. Lamar, an eminent restoration scholar, expressed surprise to find several of the ablest Protestant expositors interpreting this passage as a warrant for self-defense. Nevertheless, the view maintained here is that self-defense is exactly, this is Burton Kaufman's thought, exactly what Jesus taught. Says self-defense is a basic, natural right of all men, and there is no lawful government on earth that denies it. And I thought, wow, I never thought about that. Just why should it be supposed that Jesus denied to Christians such a basic right that has never been explained? He goes on to say, resist not evil, go the second mile, turn the other cheek, give thy cloak, also, etc., are not applicable to situations in which one's life is threatened or in danger. So I don't know. Food for thought, I guess, huh? Kind of interesting on that. Any thoughts or comments on that? Or yes.
You know, I wonder sometimes, of course it's speculation, but all of them scattering like that.
Right.
That might save the lives, you know, because these Jewish high priests were out to get people.
Yeah.
And they did meet back together. Remember, Peter said, let's go back and finish. He was ready to give it up. But Jesus, of course, gathers them back up. But these men had to remain there because the spread of the gospel was on their shoulders. They had to survive for a while to get this word preached. And sometimes I wonder if, it wasn't right that they didn't stay there. They did stay there. I don't know.
Very possibly, Wayne.
Jesus, if he felt they were wrong, he forgave them because he did bring them all back together.
Right.
And he did set them out to preach the gospel. And maybe he himself did not say anything because he knew that was the only way for them to save themselves, that they could continue the mission that he had set them on because if they had scattered, they'd surely have
Been arrested.
the same demise as Jesus himself.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And Geraldine? I think it's one of those things that may have a twofold meaning. Okay, I thought about that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how do you secure food? How do you, defend yourself? You got to be a pretty fast runner, I guess. If you don't have anything to, that would leave me out. But
You guys together, you're not doing the other guy.
yeah,
Hostile.
it was a hostile environment, and so I can see where it might be a physical sword, and I can see why it had the meaning of words. Any other final thoughts? All right, let's look at that kind of brings lesson 105 to a close. Let's look at our questions, if you have them with you. For lessons, I said we save them 102 to do at the end of tonight. In lesson 102, that was the calm before the storm. Question number 1 of the individual study guide says, what will happen immediately after Jesus returns? And that was, we discussed, was going to be the judgment. Yeah, judgment. And we know from our study how many judgments does the Bible say there will be? Uno, just one. In the parable of the sheep and the goats, why do the sheep inherit the kingdom? What do they represent? The righteous, humble, meek, all those. They are the ones on the right hand. In the parable of the sheep and the goats, why do the goats inherit eternal fire? Well, just the opposite of the sheep. The goats, they are the unrighteous ones. Okay. What determines whether a person is a sheep or a goat? Yeah, remember, it was by their actions towards others. That was all about service. We discussed that a lot of people criticize that statement and say, well, we don't need any faith, we just got to do works. No. You got to take it all together. But that particular one emphasized action towards others. Question number 6, why is it important that the same Greek word ionos is used to describe both punishment and the life in Matthew 25 and 46? If the punishment is not everlasting, then the life is not everlasting. That's the simple answer to that. Why did the Sanhedrin not want to arrest Jesus in public? Oh, yeah. They were scared of the people. They didn't want a riot or uproar to take place. Why could the Sanhedrin not arrest Jesus in private? They didn't know where he was. They always left Jerusalem to go back up to the Mount of Olives, and that's where they stayed. It's interesting, after the Passover feast, as they were going back up when the Peter's denial took place, and what we talked about, a lot of the verses say that they sung a hymn after the Passover dinner. I thought that was kind of neat. How would the Sanhedrin problem be resolved? If Judas walked in, they couldn't have asked for anything better. How much did Sanhedrin pay Judas? 30 pieces of silver. We talked about 4 months' pay, or the worth of a common slave or servant. Yeah. According to Luke 22 and 3, What was the basic reason for Judas's betraying Jesus? Now, boil this down to the very, very essence of what happened. Satan entered his heart. Yeah. Satan has entered his heart. Any questions on the study guide for lesson 102? Okay, 105. Bible class questions. Number one, according to John 13:21, what was Jesus' emotional state at this time? Troubled in spirit. Yeah, we talked about all the reasons why. He knew what was going to happen. His time was near. He knew what he was going to have to endure. He was saddened by the betrayal of Judas. Who asked Jesus, in effect, who will betray you? John did, leaning up against Jesus' bosom. What did Jesus do to answer this question? Gave the one who betrayed him, dipped bread, yes, give it to him. Remember in the garden how, I'm jumping ahead a little bit in ways, but how did Judas identify Jesus? Came up and gave him a kiss, remember? After Judas received a morsel of bread, what did he do? He left immediately and walked out. He didn't get to be there for the institution of the Lord's Supper. Missed that. What is ominous words close to John 13:30? Let me get back over John 13:30, see what that exactly says. 13:30. Oh, we're talking about where it says after he received the piece of bread, he then went out immediately, and it was night. It was night. What did we discuss about that? So, well, I take it to mean darkness. Darkness had already set in. And of course, sin is represented by darkness. And of course, light is represented by righteousness. That it was night is a specific, I think, referral to that. What new commandment did Jesus give to the disciples? Love one another as I have loved you. Was the commandment new? As Wayne pointed out, it was new in the sense that it was to be the kind of love that he had for his disciples. Number 8, what would be the result of their keeping these commandments? Well, all men will know that you are my disciples, he says. And that what startling prediction did Jesus make concerning Peter? Deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed. 10, how many of the disciples did Jesus say would fall away that night? All of them, the rest of them. How did all the disciples reply to Jesus' prediction? They all said without a doubt that they would die with Jesus. And I think their intent was that's what they were to do. But didn't. Perfect timing. Any final questions? Thank you so much for your kind attention all these weeks. And Wayne will be taking over for the next couple of weeks. I'll fill in for him in July a little bit, but